I'll share an experience where after the movement of awakening that we call awakening to being consciousness, the emptiness of that was, on the one hand, really blissful, and I liked it. But on the other hand, there's something about it that really stripped away my my consciousness, my body's natural ability to kind of hold off and manage and regulate emotions. You know, it just all started hitting me at once. My defense mechanisms, my internal defense mechanisms, for all the suffering that I hadn't gotten to yet. Lord knows I've tried. There's a lot. So lo and behold, post-awakening, there's still stuff to process. And so when I went through that movement and lost the ability to defend against these emotions that were still in there and creeping up, I actually consciously engaged in several substances, soft stuff, nothing too dramatic. But I realized that because I didn't have anymore the internal ability to regulate these things, and it was really intense. Like, it was the kind of thing where I wouldn't be able to work or just basically function. So I consciously engaged in what is ultimately addictive behavior, chemical dependence. But I didn't do it in order to not feel these things. I did it in order to titrate the emotions, to not block it full stop, but to lessen it enough so that I could then process that lesser amount that was coming through the pipeline. If I didn't do that, it would just be too overwhelming. I couldn't get my arms around all the stuff that was coming up. But with a little bit of alcohol, a little bit of tobacco, a little bit of whatever, you can take this big geyser of emotional stuff that's coursing through you and get it down to something like this. And when it was like this, then I would consciously engage in processing it. I would go after those feelings. I wasn't avoiding the feelings. I was just trying to get it to be something manageable. And then as I processed all this stuff in here, what had been this big, started to shrink on its own. There was just less of that backlog of emotional energy that needed processing, and eventually got to the point where this is all that was left. And once it was here, then I didn't need the substances anymore. And so then, I went back to, not abstaining entirely, but a more, functional, less addictive relationship with, alcohol and whatnot. And I wasn't needing it a little bit every day just to manage. It was went back more to just, enjoying on the weekends and whatnot. But I needed something to be able to get this amount of emotional energy that was overwhelming to, in the moment, be more like this, so that over time I could shrink that geyser down to something more manageable. So I'm definitely not one to judge people for their addictions. I don't think that addictions are always a terrible thing. I think it's just because of the state of the human condition and how much suffering we carry in our souls. I have absolutely nothing against people regulating that, titrating it in whatever way works for them. But I always advocate being mindful about it. I advocate not going mindlessly into it and just trying to divorce yourself entirely from your feelings. But whatever addiction you have, just be mindful that you're engaging in an addiction. Just be honest with yourself, straightforward. It's just the truth of what is. You don't have to judge yourself for it. Just recognize, okay, I'm engaging in this thing. What is that doing for me? Is that helping? Yes, today it's helping. Today it's definitely helping. Okay, great. If it's helping, then, stick with it. But you'll miss the moment when it's no longer helping if you're engaging in it mindlessly. If you're just, going to it because, you've gotten into the habit of it and you just don't want to feel and so forth. But if you stay mindful with it, then you'll notice when something's shifted and it's not helping as much as it's starting to harm. And when that happens, then obviously probably the best thing would be to, either wean yourself off of the addiction or go cold turkey, whatever it is. But, at a certain point, if it's not helping, then you need to recognize that and start doing, whatever rehab needs to be done. That can be, on your own time, if it's not too severe. If it does get a little bit out of hand, you might need some help. But I'm not one to say, don't have any vices, don't have any addictions, don't use chemical, substances in any way whatsoever. Sometimes they can be very helpful. It's just when it starts to get into that, I don't want to feel anything. And so you get this backlog of emotional energy that's just building and building, and you need more and more and more drugs or what have you in order to keep that wall up. That's when you're creating a scenario that the only outcome is either death or rehab. And in the process, you'll lose, if not everything, potentially quite close to everything. So be mindful about it. Just notice, be honest about it. And if you can do that, then your addictions can be managed in a way that makes life livable and enjoyable in certain ways without going down that spiral. So now open to the floor to any questions. If I did miss anything, I hope you caught it and you'll ask a question about it. Just let me know what your thoughts are.
Hi, Nathan. It's Durga.
Hello.
Hi. I like what you said about being mindful about our negative patterns or addictions. It's like I can still continue doing it, and you're not telling us to stop doing something. So it makes me feel like I have a choice, and I am mindful. And I wish I wasn't, I didn't have the pattern. And my pattern is I tend to feel overwhelmed, and by feeling overwhelmed, I give myself permission to freeze, that I don't have to do something, and and that's something that just came up recently. I wasn't like this when I was younger, but I don't know how it developed. But so I noticed that by being overwhelmed, I can distract myself from doing what I'm supposed to be doing.
Right.
Instead of, and I think about it sometimes, I'm like, if I just simply just put one foot in front of the other, just do one thing, and then do the next thing, and then, I would go down the list and probably get it done simply that way. But instead, I look at the whole field of everything that I need to do, and I'm like, I'm just going to go and do something else, to distract myself from, not prioritize and things like that. And so I mismanage my time, I mismanage my effort, and I don't get things done. And I feel like now I've wasted a whole lot of time, and I feel fear because then, my whole life is wasted and blah, blah, blah. So I do feel like that's my go-to for not being present to what needs to be, what is calling to me. I've thought about it quite a lot, and I know I'm doing it. I think that's all I'm going to say right now.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sharing that. And that does actually jog a couple thoughts in my head around addiction. One is that what you're describing, I'm sort of picturing myself doing the same thing that you just described of, getting overwhelmed and just wanting to, distract and not deal with any of it, not even the simple, just baby steps. What do I need to do right now? Do that.
Yeah.
step by step. And so, the question is, what's the payoff? Like when we know in our head that if we just, took it step by step, then it wouldn't seem so overwhelming, and, we can get to the other side of it. And yet there's something that pulls us into that pattern that you described of just kind of ignoring the whole thing and finding some other distraction. And it reminds me of, when I've been in an addictive state, it's like it becomes this little semi-toxic, safe cubbyhole, like within our own consciousness. When you get into that place, even though, there's like the sense of overwhelm, but there's things hanging over your head, that you should be doing something different. There's all those thoughts and judgments, and we're kind of torturing ourselves in our own head.
Yeah.
At the same time, there's a sense of just kind of being in a kind of warm, soft, cozy little hidey hole away from all of the stresses and terrors of life.
Right.
And so that becomes the payoff. That's why something in us makes that choice, even though intellectually we know that another choice is available to us, right?
Right.
So
I feel like I have the talent or the skill to actually execute what needs to be done. It's not that I don't have the knowledge, or I can find the knowledge. When I actually step and engage myself in what needs to be done, I can do it, and successfully most of the time. But sometimes I'd rather, like you said, be safe and comfortable and not take responsibility and have somebody else take responsibility for that.
Right. And that's the ego's way of kind of escaping. It gets to, hide in its little cubby hole. And then there's this idea, you sort of then project the idea that, somebody will save you. Somebody else should just take care of it. If somebody else takes care of it, if God intervenes, or my partner, or whoever else, then I don't have to deal with it. And so, again, there's that payoff. There's that little loop in the brain that is seeking, to get something out of it. That's what the ego is always doing. It's always trying to get something out of its experience. And so even as you're feeling overwhelmed and you could fix it, but you kind of crawl up into the little crawly hidey hole in your own consciousness, and it's because, but maybe somebody will fix it for me. If I don't do it, maybe somebody else will. and so that becomes the hoped for payoff in that sort of mindset. The other thing I wanted to just briefly touch on that you reminded me when you said, it was nice to, not feel judged, and it reminded me of a story from Adi Shanti, when he was holding one of his retreats, and a woman came up, when there was an opportunity to ask questions. And she described, she just was very straight up and said that she had an alcohol problem. She was an alcoholic, and she had struggled with it, and did all these different things and tried to get away from it, and she just could not shake the addiction. And so Adi Shanti asks her, so what's your favorite thing to drink? What's your just top shelf favorite thing? And she said, some particular kind of wine. And he said, okay, tonight I want you to go home. I want you to buy yourself a bottle of that wine, your favorite one. And I want you to pour yourself a glass, and I want you to drink it. And I want you to enjoy it as much as you possibly can. Just take it all in. Now, of course, everybody in the hall is like gasping. It's like, he said what? He's encouraging her to go into her addiction? Oh my God. And that I understand that reaction, but what he was doing is he was unhooking that the drama around judgment. He was unhooking the drama around her resistance to her addiction. And that's one of those things where the resistance was actually perpetuating the thing that she was resisting. That's why they say, what you resist persists. And so that's what was happening in her in particular. Now, that might not be the best advice for somebody else. And, Adyashanti is very perceptive. He, may have just known that for her, that would be a great piece of advice. He might not have given it to somebody else. Who knows? I wasn't there. But it turns out when she went back the next day, and it was a weekend-long retreat, she went up and shared her experience. And Adyashanti asked her, so how did that go for you? And she said, you know what, I drank that the glass of wine just like you suggested, and it was the best glass of wine I've ever had in my entire life. And when I finished it, I was done. I didn't need alcohol anymore after that. And who knows if that stuck, but in that moment, something let go. It was, she was trying to get something out of the experience of alcohol that her resistance wasn't allowing her to get. She was resisting it because she knew that it was harmful to her, and she was judging it and trying to get out of that loop. So she had gone into resistance, which kept her from actually getting the fullness of what the alcohol had to offer her. And so then she had to drink more in order to try and get to that particular pleasure. And then that didn't work because she was still resisting it. And then probably even judging herself even more for having another glass of, you know what I mean? Like, it just keeps going like that. But when Adyashanti, didn't judge her, didn't tell her that her addiction was bad, and told her to stop resisting it and just enjoy it, it unhooked all of those little dramas and resistances and mental cul-de-sacs that was keeping her stuck in the addiction. And so that's part of the equation as well, is that when we get into these addictions, when we get into these patterns and we judge them, and we have hate speech in our own head about it, and all these things, those are all ways to resist it and yet not change it. And if you can get out of that resistance, if you can allow yourself just have your addiction, that's part of why I hadn't thought about it that way, but that is part of why I was taking the judgment out of this talk. Don't judge yourself. Like, there's nothing to judge. You are beautiful. You are God incarnate. There is nothing to judge here. This is just the play. This is just what life is doing. And the more that you judge, the more that you resist, and the more that you hate on yourself for your patterns and addictions, the more difficult it's actually going to be to release the addiction, because all that judgment and all that resistance keeps you from really fully experiencing the addiction itself and everything that it does have to offer, and it keeps you from feeling your feelings behind the addiction. So you have to find a way to unhook yourself from those judgments and stories and so forth. And I do that a lot with people when when we're processing something that they're kind of stuck in. So I'll just kind of throw in little, like, well, they'll have a story about how nobody will love them, and I'm like, okay, well, maybe nobody will love you. And they're like, wait, what? That's a terrible thing to say to me. I'm like, well, yeah, except you're so caught up in that story, and you're resisting the story, and that's keeping the story in place. So just feel what it feels like to, like, really embrace nobody's ever going to love you, so that you can finally feel it fully and then let it go. And it's the same with any addiction. Whatever the story is, just go to the end of that story. Whatever the worst case scenario of it is in your mind's eye, just do a thought experiment of, okay, let's say I do go to the very end of this, and it's the very worst thing that could ever possibly happen, and it's just happened. Now what? Well, the story has an end, and you got there. So it becomes much easier to disengage from the story and the addiction and the pattern and the whole egoic play, because you've allowed it to go through to its logical conclusion, rather than constantly resisting it and judging yourself and all the things that we do, that in the end ultimately just keeps the whole pattern alive. So those are my extra epilogue thoughts on addiction. Thank you for jogging my memory on those.
I think I understand what you're saying.
Hmm. And so in terms of, the overwhelm and what you do in response to it, you know, this is sort of the homeopathy method of dealing with negative patterns. We actually add more of whatever it is to the system so it kind of blows up. And so, like, what is the end that you are resisting? Like, what is the thing that you are, terrified of when you're overwhelmed? What is it that's at the end of that you're desperate to not have to go through? Can you get a sense of
Well,
that?
I think I'm avoiding, I don't know, maybe a sense of failure. Like
Failure.
I failed. Yeah.
Gotcha. So
Yeah.
then what I would say is just allow yourself to be a failure. What if you are a failure? What if you're the worst failure this universe has ever concocted?
I cannot stand that thought. Oh my God.
Right. So here, this is it, right? So
I'm
this is
breaking into a sweat, Nathan.
exactly, yes.
Thank you so
Yes. So
much.
this is homeopathy in action. But so now
Oh
you're
my
trying
gosh.
it, right? And it's uncomfortable, but you're smiling, like it's not exactly the worst thing that you could ever experience. There's actually,
There's
I'll
more
just
than
pause a little
failure.
bit. I want you to sort of feel this and tell me what you're feeling.
Okay.
So with that idea that you are the worst failure the universe ever created.
That's a very terrible idea.
Right.
Very, very terrible.
You've been avoiding it for a long time.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now let's just confront it.
Well, at least I know I'm not going to die.
Right. Perfect.
Yeah.
That's
Because
a
I
good
can
place to
still
start.
breathe. I can still breathe, and I know if I ask my husband, he's not going to think I'm a failure.
Right.
Um,
Well, that's a way to counterbalance the story. You can look at other people to not have the story that you're a failure in order to, to resist your own story of failure.
I see.
So what we're doing here is we're going all the way down to the very center of that failure fear that you have. And let's, even before we do that, the feeling that you got when you started to kind of have a bit of a hot flash, when I just threw that bomb at you, right? Is there anything that kind of let go once that moved through you? Like, is there any sense of space or freedom or just a little bit of letting go once you processed a little bit of that, almost unwillingly, but your body processed it, you got hot? Is there anything that is just a little bit looser around the story of failure?
I don't know. I'm still reacting to that, what you just said.
Okay. It might take a little while. It's a big thing, and sometimes you get sort of an instantaneous release, and sometimes it's a little bit more of a slow burn. So what I offer you is, as the call comes to a close and you have some time on your own, just really have that as a thought experiment, of what would it be to just accept the idea that you are a failure, and wouldn't it be nice if you could feel that and have it not hurt at all or be scary or terrifying? If failure was just a state like eating ice cream or stubbing your toe, you know what I mean? There's some freedom in that. And the other thing that I'm going to suggest to you is in the members content section of the website, I've recently uploaded a video. It's got a guided meditation for helping you to feel your feelings in a way that is sort of safe and easy, sort of titrates the whole thing. And so I'm going to suggest that when you have time, go check out that video and apply it to this fear of failure that you have. and have that be the emotion that you're going to work with the tools that I offer in the video, and see what that does for you. See
And
what kind of,
this is in your website?
on the Truthspirations website,
Okay.
where all the past recordings are. I
Okay.
put at the very top exclusive content just for members, and that includes, there's one up there, and there'll be a second one soon, and that includes a video on how to feel and heal your painful emotions. And so give that a shot.
Okay.
And I'll tell you, you're not a failure. I just want you to be able to experience moments of failure, which we all do, without it being so terrifying and overwhelming. It's one of the things that I specifically addressed when I was working on my abundance issues, was the fear of failure. Because that fear of failure meant that there were certain things that I couldn't even try to do, because if I failed, then the pain of that would be too much. And so there were things that, you know, I needed to try. I needed to take some risks in order to be successful. And it was hard to take those risks when the possibility of failing, which is inherent to risk, was part of the equation. And so becoming free of the fear of failure actually opens up so much of your life. And I want that for you. So this is your homework, should you choose to engage with it, is to, you know, really allow yourself to feel that failure stuff that you've been avoiding so much. And if it helps, there's that video that can kind of walk you through a way to feel it in a very sort of safe and guided way.
Okay. This is good.
Mm-hmm.
Because my sister's coming to visit very soon, and I think I'm feeling a little bit anxious about that, because I view her as a very successful person,
Mm-hmm.
and by her coming over here, it sort of like highlights that you know, I'm not this successful person that I thought I would be, you know.
Mm-hmm. Good.
It
Yeah.
just has a comparison when she's physically here.
Right. So it pushes that button when she's around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good. Well, it's nice the way the divine times things, because I had no idea that your sister was coming, but here we are. You have a process now for addressing some of the stuff before she gets there. So I'm glad.
Yes, I have 5 days to deal with this.
Perfect. Easy peasy. Did anybody else have any thoughts or questions or anything they wanted to go over in terms of the question of addiction or attachment?
So, can you hear me?
Yes, Durga, I'm just going to ask you to mute yourself so I can hear Ann. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
I just wanted to share an experience of what you're talking about. And I'm basically a super shy person. And when I was really young, I couldn't talk hardly. But then I decided to become a professional singer, almost like, you know, because I thought, well, that's the way I'm going to be able to grow the most as a human. Anyway, that's just kind of setting it up. But I had this incredible fear of forgetting the words when I was out there on stage. And I would just try. So I practice and practice and practice till it was in my subconscious. Anyway, um, years and years go by, and I'm just singing, and everything's fine. And then I got to a point where I had a few experiences where I forgot the words, and I figured out it's not so bad. I Sometimes I would just make words up. Sometimes I'd say, "Oops, I forgot it. Let's start over." I mean, I just went in all these different. I had all these different scenarios of things that happened, and it was like, you know what? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if I forget the words. Who cares? You know, I'll do my best, but I just got over that somehow. Just like, just got over it. It didn't matter anymore. I didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
And Durga, um, I don't know your sister, but I'm sure you are very successful in certain ways that she'll never be successful, if that matters. So, you know what? Who cares? That's what I feel about it. That's all. Okay, thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for your support for Durga.
Yeah.
And I agree. You know, everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, and you know, some strengths are more sort of socially recognized and reinforced. But that's just society. That's not necessarily what's most important. And so I'm sure that you have strengths that she does not have. And vice versa, and that's normal. That's just life. You know, that's how it should be. So we can all, you know, be diverse and have our own personalities and our own interests in the things that we're good at and the things we're not good at. That's all just beautiful tapestry of life. And your story, Anne, reminds me of you know, my drama around money was something that, you know, I worked on in many ways over many years. And I felt like I'd kind of gotten to this great, you know, pinnacle when, you know, I turned my $70,000 in debt into $70,000 in savings, and I bought this house, and I was renting it out while I still lived in the Bay Area. And, but I had all this fear come up when I bought the house. And of course, my fear was that, you know, I would not have enough money for something that the house needed, particularly while I had a tenant. Like if, you know, the foundation cracked, or, you know, there was a flood, or, you know, whatever it is. And so when I bought the house, all this fear came up, and it made it so that I was so contracted that for about a year and a half, I actually was just kind of at subsistence level in terms of my practice. Like everything in my life kind of closed in because I was in such contraction and fear around this huge obligation that I'd taken on, not just financial obligation, but then as a landlord as well. And then wouldn't you know it, when I'd finally sort of whittled down my bank account down to basically nothing, the house flooded. I had absolutely no like backup or resources. And right, you know, at that moment, it was just like a divine masterpiece, just, you know, just like, wow, divinity really just timed that perfectly. And when it happened, all I could do was laugh. You know, I had fortunately done a lot of the work, you know, over the years. And so even though that fear was still there, it wasn't as strong, you know, it wasn't as deep as it had been because I'd done the work. And then when my worst fear came to life, all I could do was laugh. And then it really wasn't that big a deal. And then, you know, some solutions were found, and it all worked out just fine. But I needed that final sort of FU from the universe to my story and my fear, and just be like, oh, you're afraid of that. Okay, here you go. In order for me to fully and finally confront that fear in a real world situation, not just theoretically, not just through meditation, not through self-healings, but, you know, to have my worst fear actually come to life after I'd done, you know, most of the work. And then I was finally able to let it go. And now, you know, I'm even more free in my relationship with money than I was when I had this $140,000 swing out of debt into savings and a house. So it does often work out that way. You know, this thing that you're afraid of, there's this analogy of it being like being chased by a bear in a dream. You know, it's like you're dreaming and you're running, and everything's a little bit kind of fuzzy because it's, you know, this kind of dream scenario. And there's this bear chasing you through the woods, and you're running and running and running. And then at some point you just either trip or just kind of stop, and you turn around and you look, it's a cute little bear cub. He's just a little bear cub. He's not that big a deal, you know. But you never know that until you turn around and you face it. You know, all of our worst fears are like that. You know, there's actually nothing in them. It feels like there is, you know, and I honor that that's the feeling, you know, and I've had plenty of terrorizing fears in my own life. But when you do the work and process and finally kind of turn around and look at what you've been afraid of all these years, you realize that it's empty. There's nothing there. There's nothing to be afraid of. And in fact, it can be your friend. But you know, it's hard until it isn't. And so it'll be hard getting through all of that, all those layers of fear and whatever else is going on, until finally kind of meet a tipping point, and then it's not hard at all. And it's kind of odd that it was ever difficult to begin with. So again, thank you. Thank you for that story. Any other thoughts or questions today? Going once, going twice. Okay. Well, thank you all for coming once again. This was a thoroughly enjoyable meeting. I'm glad you guys got in on it, and also that you supported each other. I absolutely love that. And I look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Thank you guys for your kindness and hope.
You're very welcome.
Have fun with your sister.
Thank you.
My sister too.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Yeah.